So I want to invite. Oh, I've got the wrong sheet. I'm perennially disorganized this way, so you'll have to pardon me. Anyway, I'm going to be here today for part of the rest of today, really for I guess the rest of the afternoon, to try to put into practice these things that Larry has just talked about. And in order to get the stage set, I want to invite Jacques Latour, who is the Chief Technology Officer of the Canadian Internet Registration Authority up here, along with, I don't know, we don't have 4 seats. So I guess maybe we could do these one at a time, or Olaf, you're gonna, oh, he's just gonna bring his own. Also I will invite Maarten Botterman, who is Director of GNKS Consult BV, Olaf Kolkman, who is the Chief Internet Technology Officer of the Internet Society and also Chair Carrier, and Faud, who is the Chief Executive Officer of TwelveDot. And the purpose of this little session is to sort of set the stage for why there is a problem here at all. I think we already heard some excellent remarks from Pam earlier today, but I regard this as the be afraid, be very afraid session. The Internet of Things, right? There's 3 parts to the Internet of Things: the Internet part, the things part, and the of part. And we know what of means. The other 2 parts are maybe a little bit more difficult, and we've got some work to do this afternoon to try to sort out whether we're satisfied with the definitions and whether we're going to work through those and you know how we're going to proceed from there. But the other thing about it is, you know, we sort of have to have an idea for why there is a problem here, why people want to concentrate on this problem. And when I think about this, I like to think of basically taking everything that has ever been manufactured, hooking that up to the internet, and then deciding whether that worked. So that's the kind of picture that I have of the Internet of Things. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to people, and I guess we'll just go across the thing, which is not the order that is on the agenda, but that's the way you sat. So please, Jacques, start. Oh, here, I'll give you the mic.
And so I do have some slides. So my name is Jacques Latour. I'm the CTO at CIRA, and my slides are going to pop up shortly. All right. Can I stand up? Yeah. Ooh. Cool. All right. Haha, perfect. So, do we need IoT security? The answer is we'll figure out at the end of this workshop. But I just wanted to cover why IoT security is important for us. So I'm with CIRA. We run .ca. So we run the registry for .ca, and we run the DNS infrastructure for .ca. And we do a bunch of other stuff. We have cybersecurity services. We have registry services. But the focus of IoT is very specific to one component of CIRA. It's the DNS. So I'm in charge of security at .ca, and I need to look at what can cause harm for .ca in the future, and for sure IoT security is with the DNS infrastructure. So I'll cover that a little bit, why it's important. So the registry, you all know how that works. If you want a domain name, you go to GoDaddy or 2Cows or whoever. You get a domain, you pay for it, it gets registered, and it works. And the working part is the DNS part. So over the internet, we have over 100 servers and 100 locations where we have physical .ca name servers located everywhere around the planet that resolve .ca domain. So if you want to go to gc.ca, somebody has to go to one of our servers somewhere on the planet and resolve gc.ca is those servers, and that's where the government is. So our name servers are used to resolve all .ca domains. That's what we do. We have a global network infrastructure around the planet. We use multiple NECAS name servers, technology. NECAS is servers that all have the same IP addresses. So that's a bit techy. But we have multiple clouds. We have a very diverse infrastructure. and it's fairly large and significant. It's like pretty much all the other CC TLDs on the planet. So for .ca to resolve domain name, people have to access these things, and they need to be 100% uptime all the time for .ca to work. So this is the main business that we do. A lot of people don't know what the .ca DNS looks like, but it's a fairly big and expensive, it's a cloud infrastructure for all intent and purpose. But the challenge, so if we do risk management for .ca, the number one risk on our risk register is the DNS infrastructure being a target of a DDoS attack, and then we're not able to resolve .ca names anymore. That's the number one risk for CIRA. It's the number one risk for pretty much all cloud computing infrastructure on the planet. If you're a victim of a DDoS, then essentially you're off the map. And depending on how long the DDoS attack is, it can have significant impact. So being DDoS attack is the number one risk. And over the years, the size and scope and complexity of DDoS attack is on the hockey stick in my view. So we all heard about Mirai and all that, but 5 years ago, we were talking 100 gig attack, then it went to 500, now we're in the terabyte per second, now we're in multi-terabyte soon. So this is starting to be pretty impactful. So it's real. This is a real thing that happens for .ca. And the number one cause for a DDoS attack that we're seeing right now is IoT device. So Mirai was IoT based. That means there are devices somewhere that got compromised that were used to send traffic and cause harm on a cloud computing infrastructure. So the mitigation that we have at CIRA for the IoT, for the DDoS risk, is to mitigate the weaponization of IoT device. So if we can stop IoT device at scale from causing harm, then we protect the risk. So we need to protect the IoT device from getting infected, and we need to protect the internet from IoT device that are infected. So the how is what we need to figure out, but this is definitively the root cause for the DDoS, the number one threat for .ca. And the type of attacks are getting more sophisticated, but what the IoT bring that's new is scale. The scale of IoT device is just starting. Today we have a couple of camera per household, but when we have 20 billion connected device on the internet in a few years, now we're talking scale. The scale of the IoT is what we need to mitigate today, in my view, to prevent the future from looking really, really bad. So today I don't think we're at scale right now in terms of IoT device, but when it starts to ramp up, we're going to be, this is a situation we need to be aware and look at and mitigate today. So the last attack, so more and more what we've noticed with IoT device compromise is that they're being used in generating, in the past, the IoT attacks were reflection. That means you had a few devices that were sending traffic somewhere and it got amplified and made it real bad for some cloud provider. The new thing is scale is that the IoT traffic generation, just the brute force of 20 billion device, you don't need to amplify that. You don't need to reflect that. And if that traffic can simulate real user traffic, then it's hard to mitigate, to clean up DDoS attack from real traffic. So the future, the threat landscape with the scaling of IoT device and the complexity of the attacks that they'll be able to simulate is going to make it really difficult to figure out good from bad and to clean up your future traffic. And that's the risk I'm seeing as like the CSO for .ca that we need to mitigate. And I don't have the answers for that, but I know that today we need to find a way to protect the scale of IoT device in the future. So you said we're going to get scared. I'm scared of IoT, so we got to do something about it. And it's real. So if this is the Mirai attack, this is cameras and infected device that are sending streams of traffic to a specific target causing harm. This was 1 terabyte per second type of attack. This is doubling and triple and quadruple. It's going to be 10 terabyte soon. So today we need to find the solution to protect the IoT before it gets real nasty. That's it. Sorry. Questions? Or?
Thank you, Jacques. So I guess probably I will mess everything up if I don't follow the agenda, right? So before I ask Maarten to come up, I realized that I failed to do one of the things that's on the ground rules list there a moment ago. So I will tell you that I'm employed by a company called Oracle Bot Dyn, which is a little DNS provider with headquarters in Manchester a little over a year ago, and so I'm employed by them. But here's the obligatory disclaimer: I don't speak for them, and anything I say may or may not be agreed with by my employer. So we'll just keep this among us and everybody on the internet, and then they won't know. So with that, I will ask Maarten, please, to come up and speak to us as well. I don't know if you have slides.
I do have slides, actually. And they may be coming up. No. So, thanks for this. I'm here to talk more from a global perspective on IoT. IoT is something that's happening in the whole world, and Canada is a little piece of that. Canada affects the world, and the world affects Canada. And for full disclosure, next to my job as GNKS independent consultant, I'm also on the ICANN board. I'm not speaking in that capacity. And I'm also having the pleasure of doing the volunteer work of chairing the Dynamic Coalition on Internet of Things at IGF. And there's where we really try to bring parties together from all parts of the world, from all stakeholder groups, to discuss these issues, how to tackle this together. This issue was recognized already in the Hyderabad, the 2008 IGF, and it's been building on to a momentum where today we have a kind of paper of good practice, reflecting a multi-stakeholder perspective. And at the end of this slide show, there is also a couple of links that may help you there. So, first of all, what is IoT? And as Andrew said, I very much agree with his definition. There's a lot of discussions about definition, but basically it's about things with a little bit of intelligence that connect to the internet and interact with it, and we need to deal with that. And IoT is also everywhere. You may have your Fitbit or your Nest on the wall at home, or your TV that is nowadays also attached to your Wi-Fi, or you may not even have a TV anymore, but use your tablet to watch whatever you want to watch. But there's so much more. IoT is in the seas. It's a lot used for checking all these environmental things that normally we needed to send out people for in the middle of the night, to stand on the dikes in the Netherlands to see how high the water would get, things like that. And you see often that disasters that have been flooding the world for many years now lead to technology responses that can really help, thanks to IoT. Let's not forget that. This is a tsunami buoy. They're connected via satellite, and nowadays you would expect that if a wave or something is happening somewhere in the Pacific, that people would know beforehand and can leave the beach before the flood wave reaches that. Same for earthquakes, hurricanes, the extreme weather things that are also caused by us humans and the changes of time. It also goes very far in a way. Well, the car is a clear example. Every time a car with an autonomous system will kill somebody, we will all hear it all over the world. Whether the percentage will be the same as for human drivers will not be explained in the context, and it's a real issue to think about. It also changes the concepts of ethics and how we deal with things. This I put on it because it's basically, when we started to talk about how to use IoT, we said never come into the human body. But this is a device that measures the blood pressure in your arteries. And if you're a heart patient and you're susceptible to heart attacks, it may be good to have such a measure so you get to the hospital before you get the heart attack rather than after. And this is just to remind you that also in this society where increasingly amounts of people are getting older and we need to deal with that, costs of medical care are rising. One of the ways of dealing with it is to support people with technology in better keeping track of their health, better keeping track of what needs to be done in the household, and assist in that way. So it's a lot of reasons why we need things. There's a lot of societal challenges that we need to address and we can't address in this increasingly intensive world anymore without doing it. There's also economic opportunities driving it. But with all that, we need to be aware that we shouldn't only have it been driven by economic opportunity or by sheer volunteer effort just because we think it's a good thing. No, we need to look to the challenges that come with that as well. How do we govern this? And I really enjoyed it when earlier this year Pamela was sharing that there was really a multi-stakeholder approach to see how can we in Canada in a positive way benefit from IoT, making it secure enough that we don't get only the bad things but also the good things. How do you deal with that together? With IoT and with internet in general, privacy and data collection becomes an increasingly important subject. Yes, I'm European, and yes, GDPR seems to be driving the agenda on discussions of privacy. But please, let's step back one step before. At IGF, we also talked for many years about what it means if you have a digitized society, where, other than in the old days, yes, everybody in the village knew what you were doing. But now, basically, everybody in the world could know if we don't protect that. And that means that even in countries as India and China, where privacy is an entirely different concept than in Western Europe, North America, it starts to matter that we protect against abuse more and more. So that goes hand in hand. And nothing we can do without taking care of security, because we can agree on anything, but if our devices are approachable, not only to be used for DDoS attacks, yes, it's an important part and it's a major bother, but there's also man-in-the-middle attacks, there is also information access, there is maybe even triggering of IoT devices to do things we don't want them to do. So it's new attack vectors. So we really need to think of all that. A lot of concerns, because the things that help us, on one hand, can also bother us on the other hand. I had this picture, in the Netherlands there was a lot of attention for the Google glasses that the Beijing police now uses, which is great because they can recognize perpetrators on the distance already immediately and take action. Yes. And they can also do that with people that have dissenting opinions and things like that. It's already in 2013 that we slowly began to be aware, and Wired is often first in seeing these things. It's called the black swan type of events. The events that retrospectively people can say, we could have seen that coming, but we didn't do anything. And the truth is that now the World Economic Forum in his last January event. I think Larry was there from this group, right? No? I saw your notebook, which looked very good. So, but basically the World Economic Forum does address the major threats, and the report they make is worthwhile reading also for our industry. Cyber attacks is the most prevalent one there. It's become one of the most disruptive threats to society. And the thing is that the high development of this technology and implementation, and I say technology in general, but for IoT is one of the specific elements in that is currently really going at high speed, not only in the technology itself, but also its adaptation, its adoption. And time to market has been crucial to that. I think we're at the crunch points where we all understand something needs to happen. And we are beginning to do that. We're beginning to talk about standards, expectations. We are beginning to talk even about certification. And well, if you certify, so who is going to see to it that it really works? We also begin to understand that you cannot do any protection of this at one layer anymore, like in the old days with the telephones. Your telephone used to be certified before it would even be able to connect to the monopolist telecom provider. We're well beyond that time. At the same time, we still have the layers of the transport, of the acceptance of the signals, and of the people who make the devices themselves. So we need to put now responsibility in multiple levels, recognizing that every level's protection impacts the protection and the vulnerability on other levels. So I guess this is a slide I started using a couple of years ago. When I read the book 1984, it was before 1984. And it was still like, wow, how would that future look like? Well, I'm glad I read it. It still inspires me. The technology that has been used in 1984 is we did much better than that. Let's put it in that way. At the same time, we also see that checks and balances between the stakeholders, between a government that is there to protect the public interest, but they have their definition of it. With an industry who enables society to function with their products, with their economy, but they also have their interest in profits and things like that. And with citizens who may have even other concerns. We need to find that balance between the potential that we need to make this and to keep this world a livable world, and what we are willing to sacrifice for that. So this is just a short introduction as an inspiration to the discussion, and I fully look forward to fully participate to that this afternoon.
Thank you, Maarten. Now I would like to invite Olaf Kolkman up to talk a little bit about the Internet Society's work in this area. Olaf.
Thank you. Yes, Olaf Kolkman. I'm the Chief Internet Technology Officer at the Internet Society. And when I describe the Internet Society, I don't use the corporate words that we have on a slide. I usually say we work on the interaction between the Internet and the society, where a global network impacts how we organize society, or how society organizes, impacts the trust and utility of a global network. That is, for me, the work that I do on a daily basis. And IoT, for me, can mean two things: the Internet of Things or the Internet of Trust. I like to see an Internet of Trust, a global network, global communication that we can trust. And the things that we connect to that network will have an impact on the trust that we have in the network. But the fact that the things are connected on a global scale also impact our society. So that, to me, is the starting point. Do I progress my thing? That, to me, is the starting point. Now, I was thinking about what you're going to set out here in the coming year. And I think it might be good to understand that you're not starting from scratch. But it's also not a done deal, otherwise you wouldn't be here. There is a lot of work that has been gone on thinking about what IoT means for society and what are the principles by which we approach its security. Just 2 examples of that, and it's only 2, there are many more. The Online Trust Alliance is an entity that we joined with a year ago, actually, had already developed when they joined a IoT framework. That framework lists a number of principles around privacy, security, life cycle management, and all of those other good things. The ENISA has also created a baseline of security recommendations. That baseline addresses privacy, security, upgradability, life cycle. And if you look at other initiatives around the globe where people are talking about this, you will see that the principles are lining up somewhat. People all agree that you need software updatability. People seem all to agree that there is a life cycle of a product. There is a life cycle of the data in the product. People seem to agree that privacy is an important piece. People understand that it's not only the device, it's actually the whole service of the device. So we already see that sort of global consensus growing. This is the Online Trust Alliance. I'm going to skip this slide because I just talked about it. But that's the type of thing that you see a general, I see the norm development across the globe being aligned around these type of principles. We can spend a lot of time debating those principles, but we can also use them as a starting point. I was involved in a Dutch conversation around digital soft and hardware security. The word IoT was not used in that context, but there's clearly a IoT a discussion there. And I think this is sort of the work that you might be setting out for yourself. What happened in that discussion, I was only privy to one meeting, but what I found what interesting and important is that people first started talking about their mutual assumptions. The mutual assumptions about what is important when discussing the security of IoT or digital soft and hardware. Product and life cycle are important. Treat the IoT is a dynamic thing, something that can change on a daily basis, where DevOps is important. Use a portfolio of instruments to deal with security, and then the instruments are discussed elsewhere. Recognize that there are different roles and responsibilities. And I think we're here together already doing that. But it's good to make that assumption explicit when you approach this. And think about the ground rules, your core values. Why are you doing this in the first place? What do we appreciate about our society? What do we appreciate about the network? Freedom, security, and academic growth are things that are important for different aspects of the society, and hence important for addressing IoT. I'll get back to one of the values that I would like to interject in this discussion here. Potential instruments, certification, monitoring, security monitoring, what happens on the network, what happens in the industry. In-network cleanup, our network providers, that's an instrument, that's on the table. Can network providers play a role in cleaning up the bad shit that happens on the internet? That's a question. Testing. How do you test these devices? Is that a thing that you want to do? Apart from certification. Research. What's the role of research in this field? Usability, etc., etc. Liability. What can we do with liability? Is there a responsibility that we can attack? Enforcement of existing regulation, consumer regulation, privacy regulation. What is it that we can reuse? And how much is about consumer awareness? That's a whole set of instruments that you can talk about. And all these instruments, there are ideas, but they're certainly not a done deal. Whenever I look around, people agree sort of the principles, but that next step, now what? What are we going to do when we do certification? What are we going to do when we talk about in-network cleanup? What are we going to do when we talk about testing? What is the type of research that we need? So we find ourselves at a place where it's good to start a discussion and dive into some or all or a few of these aspects. So let me take 5 minutes to go to one of these values. This is almost a dogmatic paper in the Internet Society. The Internet invariance, what really matters. Google for it if you haven't seen it. This is what we feel is important for the Internet. And it's one of the values that we feel we need to protect when we talk about security of the Internet. So when we deal with security of IoT, let's make sure we don't break what makes the Internet the Internet. And to me, some of the things that we're talking about are permissionless innovation. The ability to innovate and invent new things and connect those to the Internet. That doesn't make it anarchy. There might be, boundary conditions. But the fact that somebody can make something new, invent something and take it to the Internet is an important feature. It means that somebody who is working in a shed in, name a country, India, can become the next big thing. Global reach and integrity. Let's make sure that whatever we do, we keep the global properties of the Internet. The Internet is not the Internet anymore when it is balkanized. It's general purpose. The Internet remains general purpose. You can build anything on top of that. That's its strength and its weakness. Its strength brought it the Internet of Things. Its weakness is that it brought us the Internet of Things. I'm not going to go through them, but that's, for me, a value that I think is important to recognize. We don't want to break the Internet while fixing IoT. So, on the other side, as one of the tools, frameworks, certifications, and trust marks. How do you do certifications? And I'm not going to read this slide, but these are a few questions that you might ask. And these are the questions that make this process so difficult. Because we can all say certification is an easy thing, but we get into all these type of questions about interoperability, about which standards that we use. And then there's this whole set of standards and also market issues. And I've just put these slides on, you can read them later, but I've put them on as an example of the complexity of the actual issue of only certification. And there are already a lot of things going on. There are trust marks and standards for certification being developed. The idea here being certification for consumers. Now, what can consumer organizations do to provide trust marks? ThingsCon, another example of that. I just want to keep it at that. The message being, we're at the sweet spot. And I think that the work that you're doing here in Canada can inform the rest of the world in places where this discussion still needs to happen. There are other places where the discussion is just ramping up. I just gave the Dutch example. But I think you can set an example in terms of creating a solution with each other that works for you. And if that solution works for you, it might well work for others too. And so I hope that in a year or so, we return here and there's a document in which all the actors in this room, civil society, industry, government, say, this is something that we can work with. This is something that we can implement, and this is something by which we all feel that we have improved the baseline security for the Internet of Things for Canada. Good luck with that.
Thank you, Olaf. Now I would like to welcome Faud Khan, who is the CEO of TwelveDot. He also wears many other hats, and I'm sure he will tell you about some of them.
Good morning, everyone. So full disclosure, I run a company where we basically hack devices, but we also do a lot of R&D in IoT. We've been doing that for about 8 years. But a big part of why I'm here today is we take a lot of what we do, and we're trying to correlate that into standardization. So I want to give you a very quick view, because Jacques said I'm only allowed to talk 10 minutes. Those of you that know me, I talk a lot. So a big part of what I want to share today is, first of all, Canada has been quite active in the standardization of IoT. So in the last 6 years, we've been involved with 2 primary committees. So you probably don't know ISO, and I can't explain ISO to you in 10 minutes. So you're just going to have a certain amount of faith in just what I'm telling you. But basically, Subcommittee 27 is focused on all things security. You might have heard about 27001. It's like our granddaddy standard. And then from that, we deal with things with crypto, with privacy, with common criteria. If you deal with products, if you're in from telecom, you probably know that one. And then about 2 years ago, well, about 6 years ago, we started the first incarnation of the IoT group. And we started what's called a study period. So under that, we basically looked at just what is the state of things going on. But there's 2 parts of it. There's the part of we've got to make the internet work, and then a security practitioner like myself goes, what are all the attack surfaces within that environment? And that's what I'm focused on. So I definitely wear that hat of a security practitioner within the entire operating environment. So basically what we needed to do was we have to quantify risk. That's always been the problem, is how do we do this? Because it's not easy, and it's different for every person who uses a product, whether that's the user, whether that's the vendor, whether that's the telecom provider. So you're not going to read this. However, I do have the full image if you want it. 4 years ago, so we did the 2-year study period. And when we started it, we had the first meeting, and I attended that. And when I attended that meeting, I was the only security person in the room. Good and bad, I'm always the only security guy in the room. But what happened was the largest manufacturers in the world were represented in that room. And for 4 days, 8 to 12 hours, they were just coming out with product solutions, all kinds of stuff. It was so overwhelming, I started to build a mind map when they started talking. And over the course of 2 years, we mapped every single aspect of IoT into this diagram. And it's still relevant today, because it becomes the attack surface of IoT. It helps us now quantify how do we understand the problem, okay? So what I wanted to do was, I think when everyone talks about security and the IoT problem, we try to boil the ocean. It's like, oh my God, we can't possibly fix this problem. And I say, yes, we can. Because we need to basically understand what your risk position is. If you quantify your risk position, you can then say, what are my risk controls? Because a security practitioner will always think of things as a control, okay? So I break it into 2 boxes. Are you the organization buying it, or are you the person making it? Okay? Stay with me, I'm going to get into this. From that, you can determine your risk and your requirements. So we take this one level. There's 2 concepts that really need to underline this. If you're the company who's buying something or using something, there's the concept of the information security management system. It's easy to understand, it's easy to deploy, it's easy to quantify your risk for using any technology, whether it's IoT, whether it's cloud, whether it's mobile. You can do that quite easily. If you're a vendor, you have to securely develop a product. Those rules are well known as well. People don't use them, but they're well defined. But one thing that isn't is that overarching, and that's incident response. And that's where we fail dramatically right now, is when our network's under attack, when our device is under attack, what do? We're never prepared. That's why incident response is such a key aspect of that. The second thing is this whole cybersecurity culture. We don't have it. As Canadians, like, we're all loving people. We love each other, you know, we get along together, but we're overly trusting, okay? I don't trust any of you because I'm a security guy. But Canadians, for the most part, are over-trusting. If someone tells you something, you believe it. You don't think your neighbor's going to do anything bad against you. You sure as heck don't think your neighbor's going to attack your network, but his device might attack your network. What happens then? Right? Those are the kind of things we need to start thinking about is how does IoT become the platform for attack? And how do we mitigate that? So we break this down to the organizational view. Now, this is just, I'm not going to go into these standards in any depth. I just want to kind of show you what we've been working on and then how they help solve the problem. Okay? SC41, we've got 30141, which is the reference architecture. Okay? That's going to publication, I think, next month. So that's there. The group that I head up is called Trustworthiness. We're already getting ready to launch a standard. So it's not official yet because it hasn't gone to ballot, so I can't officially talk about it. But it will be coming. In SC27, 27020 is IoT requirements. That's already approved. And we are starting work on that in 2 weeks' time in China. And the base standard's already written. Okay? Hoping to get that done in 2 years. So we will have that. On top of that, there's countless other standards that we have for testing, for crypto, for networking, for privacy. All of this stuff is there, even the development of like de-identification. So when we're collecting all of that data, we're data mining all that data, now can we encipher someone's identity from it? What does that mean? Think about healthcare. Think about healthcare products. So being able to de-identify that data and showing those frameworks, because if you implement an ISMS and you're a medical records company, you know de-identification is a risk. You have to have the controls in place, right? It drives your decision-making process to minimize IoT security risk, right? Simplify it. Kind of walked you through all of this already. I'm not going to get into the big details. The bottom bullet is around continuous improvement. Realize today when you start, you're not going to have it all figured out. But realize 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, your product will be better following this model. I kind of talk about ISO and IC a lot because that's what I deal in, but they're not the only ones. There's lots that, like IETF, other standards that kind of drive how you can basically create your controls and your baseline, okay? This is just creating ISO because, one, it's internationally recognized. A lot of these products want to be globally sold and purchased. The other thing, too, is you can do certification. And that's a big thing for if you're in the oil and gas market. You want to show that that product is certified. The other thing is it gives you the minimums. And for the lawyers in the room, it shows due diligence. Okay? The only thing I'll just finish on is this is not just theory. We actually have started this practice. Those of you probably know CSA group. So if you buy anything electrical, you'll see a CSA stamp on electrical products. So we've been working with CSA and BC Hydro to actually take this concept and start to evaluate products. And so we're running through a process right now where we're actually using this kind of format to formally evaluate IoT solutions and hopefully get a sticker on them that basically says they've been gone through a formal testing and evaluation in Canada. And that's what we're working on right now with CSA and BC Hydro. So that's coming. The other thing that BC Hydro has done, because they're a leader in this, and it's pretty amazing some of the stuff that they want to do, is they're holding a symposium next month, which is a closed-door symposium of just the power utilities in the country. And the goal of that is to basically create what that baseline is for products in the country, going for that stamp. So those are the things we're working on. Hopefully that was informative, and I did in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, don't go away. I'm going to give you this microphone. Take it over there. Oh, thank you. And Jacques and Maarten, if I can invite you back up. So the agenda says that we're having lunch at noon, and believe it or not, we're running a little ahead of schedule, so this is good news. So I just want to draw out a few themes that we had here, and then maybe if there are any questions or things that people want to draw out of this discussion before we go to charging you with the next phase of today. I just want to draw out a couple of items here. First of all, I think we had Jacques here to scare us and make us afraid that the internet is just going to be over if we don't do something about this. That's an important thing to recognize, right? The way that the internet is designed it has sort of grown over time, and the fact of the matter is that it wasn't really designed. You know, when most of these protocols were originally designed, all of the people who did them knew each other. They could get into a room and you know, do interoperation that way. And somehow this laboratory experiment escaped into the world, and now we've got the internet that everybody's using. And so that's the first set of problems. So we've built stuff on a foundation that's maybe a little weak. We also heard from Maarten about another important thing here, because the first thing we want to do is say, oh, well, we've got all of that system, now we should protect it, and we should hive all of these things off. But a key point that Maarten made, and in a different way Olaf made, is that the internet's, the reason it takes off and the reason we like it so much is because of its generative properties, right? You can have new inventions and all the rest of it, and there's no gatekeeper. There's nobody who's in charge in making those things. And so we want to hook things up because that was the point of the internet, right? The whole point of the Internet of Things is to hook things up that make more useful stuff that you can then build on. Pam was mentioning this morning in her opening remarks. So that's a second really critical piece that we want to take into our discussion here. And then finally, we've got the discussion we just heard about how standards can help with all of this, but it requires, I think, some practical ways of implementing those things and practical activities on the part of the various people who are using them. Different groups of people have different responsibilities in this context. So whether you're a consumer or a vendor, you've got a different set of considerations you have to put in place. So with that, I'll be a mic runner here, and I'll see if whether people have things that they want to talk with our panelists about. Literally nothing. You're all completely satisfied.
I have a question to follow.
Okay, well then take the mic there.
So in the picture you painted, you clearly showed the vendor and the consumer of the device as the sort of the box for the security properties. I try to convene that I think there is a third party to that mix, and I think that Jacques brought that home pretty good, and that's the internet as a whole, the rest of the world, so to speak. And in most of these risk and control trade-offs, the risk is actually external to the device and the network, or your direct partners, so to speak. I have no insight exactly about how ISO deals with that, but perhaps you can share the insight of how that external risk to the internet as a whole or the whole of society is taken into account in the design of those security controls.
Okay, so one thing I only had 10 minutes. So one thing I will talk about is it's important to understand ISO doesn't do things in a bubble. So for example, they don't send Faud to basically say, hey, we represent all of these things and end all be all. Actually, we have lots of different groups who are part of it, and they have what are called liaison relationships with ISO. So we have like Etsy, we have ITU, we have multiple different stakeholders who attend. On top of that, it's countries, right? So we're countries who represent this. So for example, Canada, we travel under Standards Council of Canada. In the United States, it's NIST and ANSI. So you get a mix of people who work for vendors, who work for governments, who work for different groups. And so they bring those different voices to the table. When we start to write a standard, there's multiple different stages, okay? So when what's called a new work item, or when you propose a standard, there has to be a minimum of so many countries who say, hey, we support this and we should create that standard. Then on top of that, you need to have a certain amount of inputs and a number of votes to make sure that that actually passes, those kind of things. So when you talk about, okay, when do those external parties involved in it, they're involved in through the whole process. So they consider that. If you look at both of those standards, ITU and multiple other groups have been providing inputs into make sure, like when you look at a product, for example, the whole concept is that, I'll just step back just one sec. So if you take a product and you understand what the risk surface is because you did a threat model at the design stage and you removed 90% of the threat attack surface, okay? Presumably, if you put that product in field, its ability to be weaponized is considerably reduced, right? The risk to the user is eliminated or reduced. The risk to the network operator is eliminated or reduced. The risk to the actual vendor from a liability perspective is eliminated or reduced, right? That's the goal. Create a secure product, the product goes away. All those, that attack surface goes away, right? It seems simple in concept, but it's really the reality of it. That's all we have to do. But the thing is, we have to change our mindset first before that actually happens, which is the hardest part, because you have to convince someone to actually, this is the path that we need to go down. And hopefully that answers your question. That's the challenge, yep.
Just to add to this, we talk about security and similar issues relate to data and privacy. You assess the risks for disclosures, you assess the risks for security, and we have these assessments at every stage of the production. So how do you deal with the fact that assessing the security risk of an IoT device says nothing about its risk in the context of a network of devices and how it's used?
So if you look at the, like, so I had the two different columns, right? There was the one on the company side, and then there was one on the vendor side. And then under there, I had the box that said SDLC. So those of you that might not know what that means, it's software development lifecycle. Okay, it talks about how typically a vendor will create a product. So if you do what's called a secure SDLC, you'll typically start with what's called threat modeling. So that's basically your engineers are sitting around, they come up with the concept of the product, okay? They have to break that down into its individual components of an architecture. And from that, what you do is there's formal processes and standards that basically say, here's how you threat model something. Here's how you threat model the different components. Here's how you threat model the network layer. Here's how, like, that interconnectivity stuff would have to be threat modeled to say, here's the potential risk for attack, those kind of things. If you do those things, then you mitigate them. Now, I'm not saying that you have to fix them all, right? As the product developer, you say, okay, here's the critical ones. We're in release 1, we're going to mitigate these ones by doing this. In release 2, we're going to mitigate these ones, right? At least you're showing that you've quantified the risk, you're going to mitigate the risk in the entire product cycle. We don't have the expectation that every single product is going to be secured overnight. We're just saying it's a process. Start and manage what you can, and then do the continuous improvement process. That's the concept. And by doing that, we then get to an internet that has secure products. You look at the number of routers. I mean, we just had announcements today with Cisco routers and switches, not to pick on them, but I mean, you can put any vendor name there. Every day you see these, You see the vulnerabilities that come out. And why is that? The reason why that is the lack of testing and assessment that happens in products before they touch the internet. Full stop. If we started just doing this at the front end, we wouldn't have all the problems on the back end. Shift the mindset. That's what we have to do. And it's, to me, it's simple, right? Like, because I've been dealing with it for 8 or 9 years. We test products all the time. I think in the last 8 years, we've evaluated about 300 different IoT products. We'll get into it. Within 1, maybe 5 minutes, we can compromise any device or network because we just find where the low-hanging fruit are and we can target it. Whether it's the application layer, whether it's the device layer, whether it's the firmware layer, we just have to find, we basically do the threat model because we know the engineers haven't, and then we just find those low-hanging fruit to get into the device. It's really that simple, right? That's how we get into them. And to write a piece of firmware that can basically compromise one of these devices, it's 5 to 10 lines of code in some cases. Okay, I'm not scared. Yeah, okay, sorry. But that's what we're looking at. And I'll give you one case in point. We were hired by a customer, and we did an evaluation of one product. And it was given to us, plugged it into our network, and we got kind of busy with other stuff. Kind of forgot the product was there. And when all of a sudden we started to notice something, doing something suspicious, and it was calling home. It was calling home to Beijing. And we were like, okay, what got compromised in our lab? So we disconnected everything, and we're like, okay, something got nuked. What was it? We started plugging the devices in one by one. And finally, we tracked it down to a brand new device, out of a box, plugged into our network, and we were just monitoring it. And every day, 2 or 3 times, something on that device, we installed nothing other than to connect it to our network, would wake up and send a packet delivery to Beijing. Okay? Fully embedded into a chipset. What we figured out was one of the chips was compromised, probably in manufacturing, and there was a backdoor. Right? So, again, if you were the company that did the threat modeling, you would have known that supply chain was a critical part of your risk chain. You would have then done the evaluation and the risk mitigation within your supply chain to make sure your chip providers aren't backdoored in manufacturing. And you would have tested your product prior to releasing. Right? Changing the mindset, looking at testing and evaluation as part of the product release process.
You proposing that would be a common criteria EAL version revision 7 to every product hitting IoT?
No. So I'm not, because while I am an ISO guy, and I'm going to publicly say this, common criteria is not the answer.
Okay.
Right? Because common criteria on its own does not fully solve that problem.
Right.
Because if you look at how you do SDLC, like how you as a product developer look at it, common criteria comes at the end, which is the wrong part. Because if the organization doesn't have a secure SDLC, and then you do common criteria at the end.
So FLR, ALC, FLR, like basic flaw remediation in the process,
That's right.
which is how common criteria addresses
Right,
that type
and
of thing. Yeah.
I've never agreed with common criteria. Even though I am an ISO practitioner and stuff, it was one of the standards I've never agreed to, or I like the approach to it, because I'd rather a company look at, if you do that front end and understand your threat and mitigate your threats, as you're doing the actual development, when you actually go to deploy, you're actually giving someone a product that's, well, not only secure, but it's usable. Because you've designed security into the usability. So all of those features that make your Wink usable to that consumer, for temperature, the remote monitoring, all those things that someone is buying that feature-rich product for are there. But you know what? It's secure as well. It's not leaking your data.
One thing I wanted to address, though, just because what I heard, I didn't hear one key term, which is economic incentives. And I haven't heard that yet. And I think that is probably one of the key root causes that we have in this ecosystem, is that when we do these things, we keep kicking down the street the particular threat models, not of a design, but of an implementation in its manifestation on a given network. And when you kick that down to the street to that specific and particular implementation, is totally externalized from everybody in the supply chain that can do anything about it. And then the only person who can do anything about it is the person least able to actually affect that change. And I think that's an economic model that's a problem here. And I think it's risen out of how the internet has actually arisen, right? When you do threat modeling here, you look at who your actors are. We have nation-state threat actors who are preparing the battlefield today. And to think that a vendor or a particular individual in an instance case is actually going to defend his or herself against a nation-state threat actor. So I think the economic incentives have to be factored into what we're talking about, not just the design or technology or certification or supply chain. That's what I table.
Yeah, it's exactly where I wanted to hook in. I think the security mindset is start and beginning of everything here for product developers, but that's not quite a solution. It's a start, and even if you have the economic incentives, even if you have the liability and the fines or the discount on your insurance, that doesn't necessarily mean that you create the security mindset at the producer, and that's only one piece of that whole chain. That is what makes this such a complex project. That is what makes this so important too. I think, if I may give a recommendation to this group, don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to solve everything at once. Take one of these things. Have a look at the liability, have a look at the certification, have a look at enforcement of existing rules and regulations. Look at a specific corner of the IoT environment. We always say Internet of Things as if it's one thing, as if it's one internet, one sector. I think the IoT is as diverse as society itself. And in some places of society, we have existing regulation that might be applied and works well. I think of a medical, highly regulated, automotive, a nice corner in which you can do stuff, sort of shielded off from other industries, where certification actually also does not necessarily lead to improved behavior. See Dieselgate, for instance. So pick a sector, pick a tool, and assess it, and go through in depth and see what you can do there. That would be my advice for this group, but that's just my advice.
Yeah, so the comment was, my observation is that there's been a lot of multi-stakeholder work that has been done by different countries and different initiatives. And what we're doing here, I'm not sure how we're going to do that. We got to make sure we don't duplicate somebody else's effort. So NTIA worked on software patching automation for IoT device. So we should steer clear of, if possible, of replicating all that work and recommendation. So finding something new or innovative or relevant for Canada is going to be something we need to focus on, I think. So how...
So that's wonderful. What I like it is when accidentally the panel sets me up. Because I want to draw your attention to this piece of paper that was in the